Welcome to the Words That Change Lives podcast, helping leaders, coaches, and small business owners to 10 times the impact of their message. Join us as we delve into the art of powerful language, enabling you to speak with unwavering honesty, communicate authentically, and create a lasting impression with every word. I'd say possibly that the hero's journey storytelling structure is one of the most famous, well-used, rinsed story structures when it comes to communicating anything verbally, online, offline, in presentations, talks, keynote talks, TED Talks. The hero's journey is a classic. And if you go back to episode 2 and 1 of this podcast, I go into that in a lot more detail, and I'm not going to do that today. What I am focusing on for today's episode is one crucial point of that story structure. One which is absolutely pivotal in terms of the hero's journey, the lengthy one that Joseph Campbell created, and then the shorter ones that have come since. And my 4-part one that I've created as a result of working with countless clients on this is the pit moment. The pit moment is a crucial point of a story where you hit a dark place, you hit a challenge, an obstacle. No matter what type of story you have, it could be one that can seem completely normal, but there's still a challenge, or it can be much more extreme. It doesn't matter. It is a crucial element. And when we think of the pit moment, it is the story within the story. So each story that we have is a collection of smaller stories, and the pit moment will have a very specific moment. Where were you? What was happening? What were you hearing, seeing, doing, feeling? And why is it important for us to share these? Well, it really is important. Me sharing my pit moment, my original pit moment, was absolutely pivotal in the trajectory of my business. I ended up sharing that pit moment on the TEDx stage, and I've gone on to share many other core stories, hero's journey type stories with pit moments as well. But the particular pit moment that was pivotal for me, I do share in this episode today. And in doing that, things completely changed. And so this episode is for you, really, if you have a story you want to share, but there are things holding you back from sharing it because of the nature of what that pit moment might be to other people. Maybe you're concerned about what people might think, or you're just scared about sharing something that's quite personal. My guest today is someone that has fully embraced that. Jason Archdale is a mental wellness life coach, a speaker, and a fervent advocate of mental health awareness, and is driven by a profound desire to facilitate fulfillment in people's lives. And he possesses a unique talent for unraveling root causes and challenges through his detective-like approach. Now, he's leveraging his acclaimed DART process, which we talk about in this episode. He empowers his clients and his audience with actionable steps to bridge the gap between their current circumstance and their desired outcomes. And he does this by drawing on his own journey, marked by his own battles of anxiety, fear, limiting beliefs, depression, and his struggle with suicide, which was his pit moment. As a result of this, he's got a mission to instill individuals with the tools to effect enduring shifts in their mindset and behaviour and thought patterns. And he is one inspiring guy. He's got an unyielding commitment, and his mantra is no matter what. And in this today's episode, you will hear that. You'll hear his story, you'll hear his pit moment, and why we both feel that focusing on our pit moments not only helps us, but in sharing those pit moments, we can massively help others too. All of his links are in the show notes, so you can find out more about him. And I really hope you enjoy this episode.
I'm so sorry, darling. I love you so much, but I've let you down. Those were the last words that I spoke out loud to my 5-year-old daughter, but to myself. As I fell to my knees in the freezing cold shell of the house that I called home, I was haunted by the happy memories. I was crippled with pain, not just from the cold, but from life. And all I wanted in those last few desperate moments were to hear the loving, comforting words of my daughter. I love you, Daddy. Where I thought I would never hear those words again. And with a bottle of whiskey and tablets in my hand, the voices spoke. I took the tablets, I said goodbye to her, and I waited to die.
I'm stood in an empty house with my newborn son and my 3-year-old daughter. My husband had moved out, and all of the things I'd been suppressing for so many years started roaring for my attention. In the quiet emptiness of that house, it was absolutely deafening. I looked into the empty rooms where there once were things, and I realized I had to make a choice. I could turn towards that roaring noise, that uncomfortableness, and do something about it, or I could continue to stuff it down. I chose to turn towards it. Now, for anybody listening to this podcast episode, you might wonder what's going on here. And what just happened is that myself and my amazing guest, Jason Archdale, have just shared both of our pit moments from the core elements of our story. My particular pit moment was from my original core story that led me on to niche into what I'm doing now, doing my TEDx talk and all those sorts of things. And Jason's pit moment that he just shared was part of his core signature talk. Jason, welcome to Words That Change Lives. It's so great to have you here. How are you doing?
Thank you, Helen. It's such a pleasure to be on this. Yeah, fantastic. And thank you for having me on your show.
So this episode is about how we can embrace the pit moments in our stories. And anybody listening to this will have one. You will have a pit moment where you have experienced a challenge in your life that you have overcome. And it is about embracing these that I'm going to be discussing with you today, Jason, so that anybody listening can get inspiration from this and hopefully share their own. Because even though it might seem incredibly difficult, it's actually so important. But I want to start by exploring the wider context of your pit moment, that very powerful pit moment you shared, and how that fits into your story in a nutshell. If you're able to kind of give us the wider context of that particular pit moment you just shared.
I think, wow, where do I start with this? I think, what is the wider context? I think if you asked me this at the time when I was going through it, I'd have been stuck for an answer. But I think now there are many, many lessons that I have taken from that pit moment and also the recovery since then as to why I can now talk, very openly, actually, to others that are going through this situation in their life. And so what it really boils down to is that we can be hit and life will constantly be giving us challenges. That's a fact. We will never escape that. But what's true also is that when we go down to these pit moments, it's about having the coping mechanisms and the ways to deal with these situations that we're faced with. And ultimately, when I was going through my pit moment and many others, it's because we don't have the coping mechanisms or the strategies to deal with them.
Very true.
And I think that's what my pit moment did to me. It woke me up because I was in a state, and that's what life's about, is putting ourselves in different states. I was in such a state where there was so much negativity, this shroud of negativity, that what it was doing is blocking the inner wisdom that I already had inside of me, but I couldn't see it. And then the universe, as it were, gives you one heck of a kick, right, to wake you up. And so it slows you right down. And that's a key. That's a key, to be able to slow down and hear these inner messages that you've already got within you anyway, to deal with these life's challenges.
I can really relate to that, because obviously I shared my pit moment there where it was that inner voice that was calling for my attention in that moment of where do I go from here? I've been going down this road for such a long time. I don't know what to do. Well, I've got to listen to what's being said inside. I think that's quite a reassuring point for anybody listening to this, because we do have the answers inside us, but it's having those resources and those tools and those ways to be able to deal with those sorts of situations that's important. And let's just remind ourselves what a pit moment actually is. So in the context of the work that I do with clients, and I've been lucky enough to work with Jason on putting together creating his signature keynote talk, is that some people will have a story that has a pit moment, where you have a starting point of your story. You have then a collection of stories that leads to the inner belly of the whale, as Joseph Campbell calls it, the belly of the whale moment, where you are in a cave that which you don't know how to get out of, and a part of a storytelling structure. That pit moment is a story. It's almost the point. It's the dark before the dawn type of moment. And for you, it was that moment where you're on your own, you've got the pills, and you took those pills, and as you said, you waited to die. And after the pit moment comes the turning point, I call it. It could be called the awakening. We meet the nemesis, and we then start to go on a quest to make a change, which you have also explained in your amazing keynote talk about your story. And then the golden nuggets in terms of what we have to share, the wisdom we have to share with the audience as a result of that pit moment, is the ending of that talk. And so sharing the pit moment isn't the only focal point of the story, but it's a very, very crucial point of the story. And I want to talk about the topic that you discuss around your pit moment, because it's a really, really important topic, and it's about male mental health and suicide prevention. So you clearly have first-hand experience of the mental challenges that you have faced as a man, and talking about this, and I see you talking about it online, you put it in your content, you've got fantastic presence online, you're doing all these incredible things. But I'd just like to talk a bit more about what led you to that pit moment in terms of your own life, so that other people can relate, other men listening to this, anybody listening to this can maybe relate to that.
What led me to the pit moment is not one particular instance. I think the easiest way to say it was a cumulative of instances of not having the coping strategies that, if you imagine when you're building a brick wall, you start with a foundation, you start with the next layer, and then the next layer, and the next layer. And so what was happening was these layers were building up on top of each other. But if I just take you back a little bit further than that, because life wasn't always this way, by the way. I was a proud serving soldier for 5 years. I was a tank driver, and I was based in Germany. And after 1 year, I'd be deployed to serve in the first Gulf War. And I was driving a tank at 18, Helen, right? Who gets to drive a tank? What company vehicle were you driving at 18 years old, right? And so I was living...
It's a rubbish one.
Right. And so I was living life and enjoying it, and I was fed, I was watered, traveling the world. I was on an expedition to Venezuela. So in my youth, in my early years, I really didn't have that care in the world. But I was in an establishment for 5 years. And if you can imagine that, every need that I had was taken care of for me. So when I came out of the army, I really did find over time that transition hard. And it's almost like then I had to stand on my own 2 feet. And I was in a relationship that I didn't want to be in anymore after 17 years. And I was getting into debt with things. And I had a business that wasn't really making any money, and house repossession, £30,000 worth of debt, my phone and car taken away. And so all these situations I didn't know how to deal with in life. And so I just almost like the ostrich syndrome, where you bury your head in the sand, hoping it would go away. And that was it. But it just spiraled downwards. And so it wasn't one particular instance. It was everything, but I wasn't dealing with them as they came into my life. And then, of course, we had the added uncertainty of, will I ever see my daughter again as well at the time, who was 5 then. And then this started to have a massive effect on me, because the brick wall that I was building, all right, it was just getting higher and higher. And then it got so big, it just came crashing down, and it just buried me beneath its weight and shattered my mental health. And literally, I felt lost. I felt weak. I felt very lonely and very afraid, and not knowing how to deal with life.
Mm. And you can see how that can layer on top of each other, how all of those events over a number of years can accumulate, as you say, to feeling lost and stuck and not being able to find a way out of that situation because of all of those things. And from the male perspective, because obviously I'm not a man, but I have had conversations and experiences with men who, to try and describe that feeling of getting to that point and the expectations that are put upon them by society and how that exacerbates that, which can lead to so many. And I know that you've got statistics around this in terms of male suicide and what's actually going on. I don't know if you have those to hand or in your mind to share those in a moment, but this clearly is an issue. This is something that happens increasingly. And I'd just love to get your thoughts on that in terms of that societal expectation, what that was for you, how you think that affected your decision in that pit moment.
Yeah, of course. I think just prior to the pit moment, there's almost like, when in the story of a film, there's a build up to the pit moment, or there's a build up to the fantastic ending. This was the build up to mine. And so when I was on this little towards the pit moment journey, I was in this relationship. I was living to society's expectations, to peer expectations, because that's what I thought we had to do. I wasn't a guy, and you wouldn't believe this, having served in the army for 5 years, driving a tank, traveling the world. But I wasn't a guy who had any big aspirations or dreams or goals, right? I was a pretty safe, ordinary man on the street, living an ordinary life. And so I thought that this is what I had to do. You come out, you settle down, you meet somebody, you get married, you have children, and you do all the things that society expects of you. And the greatness that happens in the world, for me, in my opinion, back then, was only reserved for those special kind of people.
Okay.
And I really didn't feel special. So it was never going to happen to me, right? It was never going to happen to me because I didn't feel special.
Mm.
And so what tends to happen is that we end up living somebody else's dream or vision of us than living our own dream or vision for our own life. And that's the road that I was taking.
Mm. Mm-hmm. expectation and a perceived view has the ability to create those walls around us. And, whoever you are, no matter what, that's something that can affect us all. However, those statistics, in terms of this issue, this challenge we have you got any of those to hand in terms of what type of challenges we're facing at the moment for our men?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can get these off the internet, and depends on what research you choose. But the main statistic is that this is globally, around 700,000 people a year globally will take their lives to suicide. And if we look at this, and what that really equates to is one person taking their lives to suicide, one person every 40 seconds. Around 115 people a week in the UK alone will take their lives to suicide. 80%, my stat used to be 75%, but having done recent research now, depends on where you look at and who's done the research. The latest one I've researched now is 80%. I think it was in 2022, 80% of registered suicides are males.
Oof.
That's a sobering thought, isn't it? 80% of registered suicides are males. But what about the suicides we don't hear of? What about the unsuccessful suicides? What about the ones that attempt? Now, from what I last looked at, there's around, for every successful suicide, I don't like to use that, and that's probably the wrong term, but for everybody who takes their life to suicide, there's 17 that attempt. So this figure could be higher than what it is.
And I know that statistic has increased. And I've heard it mainly under a certain age, 80% men under a particular age.
Yeah, well, yeah, but we're talking, and this, I was talking to somebody at the weekend, actually. I did a talk in London, and they said, what is the sort of age bracket? And they nearly fell on the floor when I hit them. It's between 45 and 54, right? And of course it's suicide and mental health is not biased. It will hit anybody. But we're talking the 45 to 54 age bracket. And again, you can go out there and research other people who've done their stats on it, and they'll give you other ones. But and so we've got to take a look at this and be serious. Where why is it affecting this bracket? And then we've got the teens. We've got the teen aspect of it as well. The teenagers, right? It's becoming more prevalent within the teens now.
It is.
So it's almost like there's this. I think it's always going to be around, and it always has been around. But we need to deal with it, and we need to deal with it pretty quickly, because these figures, they're not dropping.
No. And this is why your pit moment is so important, sharing your pit moment in this talk. And by the way, I highly recommend anybody who's thinking of putting on an event or has a corporate audience where this type of talk would be beneficial around this topic, and we'll go more into the upturn of that and what you've done since in a minute. This is why I'm talking to you, because of your pit moment and how embracing your pit moment, obviously not at the time. At the time, it was an incredibly difficult moment in your life. But I'm so glad to say that actually you did get through that pit moment, because you're here to talk to us today, is understanding how our pit moments can become our healing. So for anybody who doesn't know, who hasn't ever come across you before, Jason, please tell us kind of what was that turning point for you that enabled you to come through that dark before the dawn? And, it's really, you had to go to hospital, right? Because you'd taken those pills.
Yeah, for sure. And it was during the night in hospital was where I almost had the awakening, if you like. And I'm going to say I started on the dark night of the soul journey. And basically the dark night of the soul journey is a rebirth. and you can only do the rebirth when you've gone through the pit moment. But during that hospital stay is when I just said, I don't want to check out of this world. I don't want to leave this world. I really don't. Did I want to die? No. Did I want to be free of the pain? Yes. So it was at that moment that I think I started on my journey by just making a decision. And that decision was to change my life. Now, for anybody who says, well, that's easier said than done. Well, yeah, it is. But I don't want these just to sound like shallow words. But making a decision to change your life is the first step in the healing recovery. But what I didn't know at the time was how I would change my life. But I just knew I had to change my life and make that all important decision. And so it was almost like it was an awakening, because the very next day, situations and circumstances, bit by bit, in baby incremental steps, started to show up for me and open doorways and pathways, and introduced to a new person who would then introduce me to someone else who would take me to a different place, and I would be introduced to a new circumstance or whatever, And so what you're starting to do is gradually move away from that old place you were in, shedding that skin of the old you, the old life. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to then release and surrender, right? And be brutally honest at that time when we make that decision. Be brutally honest. My life is rubbish right now. It really is rubbish. And be open to the change that's about to happen.
Yeah.
Although you may not know the way out of it.
Yeah. You don't know, but you've made the choice. And again, we're talking, this can be in relation to absolutely any pit moment, no matter how big or small. For anybody thinking, oh, well, my pit moment isn't that big, it's not big. It's not about that. It's about the challenge you faced and then what happened as a result of that. And for me, with the particular pit moment I shared at the beginning, it was absolutely that. It was making the choice to turn towards all the uncomfortable feelings and deal with it, face it. And I knew that was going to be hard.
Yeah.
But I made the choice to embrace that. And then on that, seek the help or accept the help and support. Or, I had a Facebook ad pop up on my feed about 2 days later, and it was for a course called Love Yourself Free from People Pleasing by the amazing Katie, who became my coach after that. And so I did that course and I fully embraced it, and all the other things that happened as a result of that. What I'd love to hear from you, Jason, and of course I know this, but you're going to share with us something very important at the end of this episode. I'd like to skip to now. Let's circle on a map where you are right now. How different are things for you than that pit moment? Tell us what's happening for you now. How do you feel about life? What are you doing? Those sorts of things.
Oh, it's very much different. It's very much different now to what it was, and I actually don't believe that I was ever meant to check out. I don't ever believe that I was gonna check out that night. I mean, this might sound contrary to what we're even talking about. What I actually believe was that my life was in such a bad state that I was taken to that level. Right? I mean, I'm a spiritual guy, so I believe in the higher consciousness, the divine, the whatever, right? The inner. So I believe, because there was so much noise in my head, what it said to me, it was going to take me down to that pit moment. I was going to go through the motions and the actions, which I did, of attempting, which I did, and go through all that. But they were still going to be there for me, right? To help me out of it. Just so that I could experience that pit moment and experience what it was like to feel it. So that Skipping forward all those many years to now, I now have the credibility to be able to stand in front of people or to do a post on my social media and talk from a place of authenticity and authority about what it was like to go through that place. And so that's what I do now is I put all this, I bulk it and chunk it all together with my pit moment, my story, the road to recovery out of it, and what it was that I did to get out of that pit moment, to the point where I went on a journey of education, development, personal growth. I made it a mission to start living a life on my terms that would enable me to live a fulfilling life, if you like. And along the way, became a mental wellness life coach and speaker. And so here we are, sitting here today talking from this capacity.
And not only that, tell us about your work with the PSA.
Okay, so the PSA, which is the Professional Speaking Association. So I decided that there's power in my story. And how would I get that out? And I wanted to be a speaker, a professional speaker. So I joined the Professional Speaking Association, and and what that does is put you within the same circles of people that are building a career and already in a successful career of speaking about their messages, their workshops, their coaching, whatever it is that they do within the PSA. And I loved it so much that I kind of turbocharged it and entered the national speaking competition for the Professional Speaking Association. I got through to the semi-finals with my story, and now I sit as the regional president for Yorkshire for my region. So, and that was just in a very short space of time, within a year. So that's what I do.
That is incredible. And for anybody listening to this and thinking, wow, that is a journey, it is absolutely incredible and inspiring, right? And I think to make that direct contrast, that pit moment to where you are now, it's really important that we share those pit moments. And what advice would you give to anyone who might be thinking, well, I have had a challenge. It might be different to your challenge, but I have experienced something hard and I would like to share that, but I'm scared. I don't want to be vulnerable, or there could be a whole number of other blockers. What advice would you give?
There's strength within vulnerability, because when we don't open up and when we don't surrender is when we block the goodness, the greatness, the power of the divine, if you like, the power of the universe allowing us to come in, allowing it to come in and guide us on the path that we should be on. So once we can accept our vulnerability, that is when things start to open up. And I'm a big fan of the Buddha and the Taoists and their teachings of the Wu Wei. And what the Wu Wei is basically is taking intuitive action, right? Because we're so busy in taking just action that we think we need to take, right? Once we can be vulnerable and just accept what is going on, right? Then we can start taking intuitive action, because we're quiet in our mind so much that we get these little nudges, that gut instinct. We get these little nudges from the universe or from wherever that nudges us in the next step in the direction that we're meant to be heading, rather than aimlessly just throwing action steps out there and getting nowhere. So be vulnerable.
Be vulnerable. Because, and I'll add to this, I had many moments on my journey where I was like, the cringe of it. I can't put myself in the spotlight to share. Who am I to share this sort of thing? Who wants to hear this, really? All of those imposter type thoughts. And my advice to myself back then and to anybody else now is move yourself out of the way of your story and your message, because you are one person and the people that you can help are infinite. So why let one person get in the way of that? It is so much bigger than you. Yes, the story is about you, but it's not just about you, because it's about all of those people that you can inspire. Imagine the amount of people listening to your story, Jason, that will go, not today then for me. Today's not the day. Because I've been inspired. I can hear that story. I can relate to that pit moment. And I'm going to decide that no, that's not going to happen today. How important is that in the world, right? That is an incredibly important thing. So my advice, go on.
It's very important. And you know, you touched on something there that although somebody may admit to being vulnerable and they want to tell a story, then they've got the second thing that comes in, and you hit on it before with the imposter, that well, I've got this fear of speaking, I've got this fear of getting out there and telling it. But embrace that, you know, because you've just got to start. You've just got to start it. I mean, as it is, I'm pretty confident at speaking anyway, and there's many people that are not, because it's one of the biggest fears in the world, right? But just have the determination and, again, make that decision that if you want to tell your story, be vulnerable and just get out there in the circles. And to become confident about something, you've got to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you don't, you know, I call it the confidence competent loop. You haven't got any confidence right now because you're not competent. But the more you do something, you become competent. The more competent, you get more confidence. And it's just an ever, you know, it's a cycle. So just get out there, face that fear and just do it anyway. So we've got this false expectation appearing real, right? That fear.
Yes.
The fear that we create in our own mind. What about if we flip that and make FEAR stand for face everything and rise?
I love that. Exactly. And also, we don't share the pit moment purely for the pit moment. We share the pit moment because of what's possible after. And so I think it's a really important piece of advice for anybody listening to this thinking, well, I want to share my story, but I don't want to just be like, you know, sharing a tragedy or a negative thing. Well, it's not just about that. The story will have that turning point, and it will have what I call the golden nuggets. It's the wisdom and learning that you have gained from your pit moment that you are now sharing, which brings me on to the last question. This podcast is called Words That Change Lives. So I'd love, Jason, for you to share, in relation to your pit moment in your story, the words that changed your life for the better.
Okay. Absolutely. And if I may, what I've done with these words that changed my life is actually put them into my process of coaching, and as part of my talk. And my process is what I call the DART process. And the DART process is D for decide, A for action, R for relentless, and T for trust. And so the first word that changed my life, and it's relating to decide, is just because you can't see the way out, it doesn't mean that it isn't there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very powerful. Yeah. So D, just because you can't see the way out doesn't mean it isn't there. And so what you're saying there is deciding is the first step.
Absolutely, because we have the shroud of negativity around us that stops, and we think that we need to know the way out, but we don't. We just need to decide. Something needs to change. But it's like being locked in a pitch black, dark room. If you imagine this now, you cannot see your hand in front of your face, right? But inside this room, there is an exit, and there's also a light switch. So it's about, once we find the light switch and turn that switch on, it will shine the light to the exit. And that's what decisions are. Shining the light on the way forward.
Brilliant. And then A?
So A is for action. Okay. And so how I mean, action, that should be at the top, but it doesn't work with the word dart, right? So A is it's the fuel, right? And but without action, nothing is going to change. So you can make your decision to change your life, but you've got to take the action also, right? But without action, nothing changes. Without commitment, nothing changes. And it's like the equivalent of not putting fuel in your car, right? If you don't put fuel in your car, it's not going to take you to where you want to go. So action is your fuel.
Mm-hmm. And R.
R is for relentless. Something that doesn't come easy to a lot of people, and it didn't for me at the beginning, but it's something I've trained myself to do, if you like, and that is to become the person that you want to be. You've got to let go of the person that you thought you were. If you want me to say that again, to become the person you want to be, you've got to let go of the person you thought you were.
Mm-hmm. So such an important part of that process, and sometimes that can take a little while to shed and to move through and evolve and let go, before. I always see it as like the chasm between, two cliffs, and we kind of got to build the bridge over that, but also let go from the other side, and sometimes that can be hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we tend to do is we have this, we build up this, because of our limiting beliefs and what have you, we tend to build this picture and this persona of who we are based on our limiting beliefs and our behaviours and what we think or feel of ourselves, right? So we've got to let go of that because they're just thoughts and beliefs that we create about ourselves. So what do you think could happen if we let go of those thoughts and beliefs and start changing those to empowering ones about ourselves, right? To the ones that we want to be, to the people that we want to be.
100%. And T.
T. Ooh, this is a hard one as well. I'm saying hard. It's one of those. T is for trust, okay, and it's probably one of the untrusting words that anybody doesn't trust in, right? Trust, right? But this is about stop being so negative about what could go wrong, but be so overwhelmingly positive about what will go right. And what we're talking about here is, again, through the limiting beliefs, through the fears about the narrative that we've been telling ourselves, based on past experience, we create this narrative for our future. All right. And so we say, because this happened to me before, this is what's going to happen again. But we've got to, again, shed that and start trusting in ourselves, trusting in our vision, and trusting in the process about what will go right and going into it and getting into the feeling of what it's going to feel like when we've got there.
Yeah. 100%. No matter what may have happened in the past, it's about trusting in yourself, trusting in the process, trusting that you're supported. Every time I know this method, this DART method, well now, having worked with you on creating your talk, every time you explain it, though, it just reignites that feeling in me and reseals the kind of the deal on how important your pit moment was and how you have used your healing to create this method and this process to help others now through your work and your speaking and all of the things that you're doing now. And for anybody interested in getting in touch with Jason, all of his links are going to be in the show notes of this episode so you can connect with him. But I really want to thank you, Jason, for coming on and having a chat with me about this. I know that you have shared this many times now, but I know that for anybody listening, this is going to really inspire them. So thank you so much for your time today.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you for having me on, Helen.
Me again. So you might be inspired after listening to that and thinking, what's that process that Jason went through to create a signature talk? And excuse the seagulls in the background. This is something that I absolutely love helping my clients with on a one-to-one basis. I take their story and draw out all of the key stories, the pit moment, the challenges, the stories within the stories, and most importantly, the golden nuggets, and help them put that into a signature keynote talk so that they can then strategize with that and share that as part of a social media strategy, share that at events, local community events, virtual keynote talks, whatever it might be. If that's something that you are interested in, get in touch with me, hello@helenpackham.com. I've got a few spaces opening up at the time of this airing. And if this is something that you would like help with, I would love to support you. Just get in touch, hello@helenpackham.com, and let's arrange a time to chat. Okay, thank you. Bye. Thanks for listening to Words That Change Lives. Please rate, review and follow on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really means the world and helps me to reach more people so that we can all harness the power of our words and change lives for the better.